So Julie is a women's rights advocate and public educator who also lives in Ottawa, like David. Her clients have included the Canadian Armed Forces, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and L'Oréal Paris. Her memoir, Resilience is Futile, The Life and Death and Life of Julie S. Lalonde, was published in 2020 and was named one of the best books of the year by CBC Books and by the Hill Times. In October, Broadview published a column by Julie on our website entitled, Canadians Like to Think We're Not Misogynistic, But We Are. So please join me in welcoming Julie.
Thank you, Jocelyn. And thank you, David. I think it's a good transition of like, there is much to despair, but also reasons to be hopeful. So to continue that thread. Also, I have a disability that means I can't look at blue lights for more than a few minutes at a time. So that's why it looks like I'm wearing sunglasses. It's actually just my disability aid. So yeah, my name is Julie S. Lalonde. I'm originally from Northern Ontario, little Franco-Ontarian communities. But I've been based in Ottawa for close to 20 years now, where I've worked to end men's violence against women, whether it's sexual assault, intimate partner violence, stalking. And I was thinking about the approach that Canadians have to this work this fall. One, because I have 2 degrees in Canadian studies and women's studies. So I'm always thinking about things from a gendered lens, but also how Canadians, oftentimes we define ourselves as just, we're not American. And that's kind of like the beginning and ending of our discussion. But this fall was the 5-year anniversary of the Me Too movement, which, you know, I've been doing this work a long time. I can say unequivocally game changer, has absolutely moved the conversation forward. Absolutely a sign of progress, but still many, many reasons to despair. And as the feminist movement was kind of sitting with this, wow, it's been 5 years. And really in Canada, it's been even longer than that, because if folks remember, the Gomeshi case was the fall of 2014. So we've actually been talking about this in Canada for 8 years. And that's when, you know, things sort of unfolding, and we saw significant changes. I mean, here in Ontario, for example, as a result of the Gomeshi case in particular, Kathleen Wynne put forward a massive omnibus bill, which changed so many aspects of the province here in Ontario. And there was no pushback. Like, it was just absolutely taken in by all parties, which I think is a really great sign. But as we're sitting and thinking about, hey, my 5 years of Me Too, what does this mean? We also had these 2 huge news stories happening at the same time. One, an ongoing saga of massive scandals within Hockey Canada. Multiple cover-ups. Now we know there are at least 3 slush funds that they created to pay out money to victims to try to hush them. And this huge story about how, whether it was Pierre Poilievre or someone on Pierre Poilievre's team, but somebody on his team, which we will now never find out who it is because they've ended any investigation, but somebody was putting meta tags on all of his YouTube videos using an acronym that is quite common within misogynist circles online. And I looked at this and I thought, what a quintessential Canadian dilemma. Because I am a white woman who travels the country and pre-pandemic internationally to talk about women's issues. And when I work internationally, I get all of this, oh my gosh, you're from Canada, please come and educate us on how we can address pay inequity and how we can address X, Y, and Z, because we have this image that we have it all figured out. And yet I have to be the Debbie Downer that says, actually, things are quite horrific here. We are not by any means the panacea for this conversation. So there's that sort of element that I'm acutely aware of, but also the ways in which, when I talk about the work I do within Canada, Canadians instantly are like, oh, wow, that's really great that you do this work to help women, because they assume I do that work in the international context. Canadians are very benevolent when it comes to charitable donations, and they are very much on board with addressing issues of gender inequality that happen internationally. And that's a good thing. Like, let me be clear, that is great. I love that about us. But where's the energy for what's going on here in Canada? And the fact that this, you know, Hockey Canada issue was about hush money and covering things up, and the fact that the Pierre Poilievre story wasn't him declaring this aloud, but rather kind of sneaking it in with these tags, I think that's a quintessential Canadian thing to do. We don't say out loud that we believe this misogynist stuff, that we think feminism has gone too far, that we da-da-da-da-da. but we still find ways to appeal to people who believe those things. And so it's actually more difficult to eradicate, because if I'm explicit with my nonsense, then you know where I stand and you can challenge me or you can deplatform me or what have you. But when I'm real slick about keeping it under wraps, it's actually more difficult for me to call out. And I think that conversation was had, that article was written a few months ago now, and it's only gotten worse. I mean, tomorrow is the anniversary of Polytechnique. Just today, it came out that, there's lots of stuff going on with the pro-gun lobby who are using Polytechnique as kind of a punchline to sell more guns. There's mass ignorance about what even happened at Polytechnique, which means there's no sort of coming together within younger generations. And OAIT, which is the Ontario Association of Interval and Transition Houses, just a week and a half ago on November 25th, which was the International Day to end violence against women, they released a report that found that 52 women in Ontario have been killed in the last 52 weeks. So that's one woman a week just here in Ontario. We know a woman is killed every 2.5 days across Canada. And since that report came out on the 25th, we now have more names to add to the list. A woman was executed, like literally execution style, in a parking lot of a gas station in the GTA on the weekend. We know that there are at least 2 serial killers that were targeting Indigenous women in Manitoba. Like, these are real things that are happening as we speak. And yet there's this veneer of politeness. And I think it's born from our refusal to look in the mirror and accept who we are. And so for me, my message is, we are the country that created Jordan Peterson, who is one of the most vocal anti-feminists in the Western world. He's sadly one of the most popular Canadians we have right now. We are the country that created Gavin McInnes, who started the Proud Boys, which is a terrorist organization that has started its work by targeting women, including myself. I was targeted by Gavin McInnes pretty intensely for quite a few years. So that's who we are. But we're also the country that started White Ribbon, where Jack Layton co-founded the White Ribbon campaign after Polytechnique and started the world's largest movement to engage men to end violence against women. That's also who we are. And so I think we need to look in the mirror and be honest about who we are, but also look to the work that's been done already and build on that. We were talking about this before Me Too. We've been talking about this since, indefinitely, but we've had men leading this conversation since at least 1991. And I think we need to tap into those sources and really elevate those conversations to drown out the world that's telling us not to talk about it, or that's seeing these changes happening in society as a threat, right? And that's where the sort of Joe Rogans and the Jordan Petersons come in, where they really see this ever-evolving change in society as a negative. And so they're indoctrinating young men into thinking that women are coming for your jobs, they're coming for your livelihood. And so I want us to really look in the mirror and say, am I okay with that being who we are? And lastly, I would say Hockey Canada is the perfect example of that. I live in a country in which I'm told hockey is our national sport. Like I said, I have 2 degrees in Canadian studies. I've had to think about hockey a lot. I'm also French Canadian, so we're diehard Habs fans. But if hockey is our sport, then what's going on in hockey is also a reflection of us. And it's time that we sit with that uncomfortable truth so that we can move past it. So those are my thoughts and feelings.
Thank you, Julie. That was quite a reality check. I feel very reality checked right now, and very much that you've held up a mirror to what's really truly happening in Canada that we, maybe dismiss too easily, or maybe think, yeah, but we are this other thing, and maybe we really need to look at who we are. Okay, everybody, you've heard from Julie. That was a lot to sit with, and so I'm hoping there are some great questions. I guess I'm wondering, you're saying this, misogyny is actually baked into the Canadian DNA. It's not just, something that happens to a few individuals in a few different communities, and it's not really us, but you're saying it's actually part of the Canadian identity. Why do people have such a hard time accepting that, grappling with that?
I think because we do have a good image generally internationally. We do love that we're known for peacekeeping And, you know, I can say it offhand, but it was revolutionary to have a prime minister stand up on the international stage as a man, a white man, and say, I am a feminist, and feminism is an important value within Canada, especially at a time where we were seeing things like Ivanka's dad down south, who was doing really misogynist things. It was quite powerful, but I think it's like we're trying to ride that high into the sunset. It's like, yeah, we do lots of really great things, and we have traditionally been, you know, we're one of the first countries in the world to have gay marriage. Like, we are progressive in so many ways, but you don't get to sort of sit on your laurels because you know, decriminalized abortion in the 80s. And so like, you're killing it, you know, like that's, I think the issue is like, we just want to compare ourselves. We view the US as kind of our barometer. And as long as we're better than them, we kind of feel better about ourselves. And there's a grain of truth to the myth, because we are generally a pretty progressive country, but that doesn't mean that we don't have any work to do.
Mm-hmm. Do you think we are? I mean, there's all different ways to measure metrics against the United States. Are there some metrics where we're better, metrics where we're worse?
Well, I mean, we haven't had the kind of horrific leadership that they've had in quite some time. I mean, I don't want to let Stephen Harper off the hook. He gutted status of women by 60% within days of taking over power. Tried to defund any and all feminist advocacy in this country. But certainly, I mean, we're not dealing with the recriminalization of abortion in this country. That's not a risk, right? We approached it not as a legal issue, but as a moral one. It's a medical procedure, and therefore we're all entitled to it. But I would say in terms of where we're failing, I would speak specifically about stalking. Canada is one of the worst countries in the Western world for having supports for victims of stalking. I was stalked. It's what my book was about. There's not a single organization in Canada dedicated to doing work on stalking. In the US, you can call the FBI if you've been stalked. There are a number of organizations who do that work. There's folks who have entire conferences about it. And so victims of stalking in Canada are in some of the worst shape than they are of any country in the Western world. And again, most of us would have no idea if we weren't living that, because it's not something that's ever talked about.
Yeah. Ray has sent me a direct question. Are you advocating for making sexual harassment and racism prevention mandatory in schools and in the workplace? Is that part of your work?
Yeah, so I train between 8,000 to 10,000 Canadians a year. That number's actually gone up in the context of the pandemic, so it's probably about 12,000, because it's easier for folks to attend a training. It's cheaper. They don't have to have me travel. They can Zoom me in. And so I've been happy to see some pretty good take up. Again, especially post Me Too, where people were realizing like, yikes, we are behind the 8 ball. So I'm absolutely advocate for that. I do work with youth ages 12 and up. Really, truly, like we say in French, Monsieur, Madame, tout le monde is kind of who I target. But I think we have ample evidence that it is incredibly difficult to have these conversations in schools, but it is absolutely necessary. And it's the same thing with workplaces. Not enough to have a great policy if it's just a piece of paper. If people don't feel compelled to use it, they don't feel supported if they come forward. And so that nuance around not just checking off a box is what I'm really concerned about, and spend quite a bit of time trying to fight against.
Yeah. Okay, so Betty has written, although there are many positive initiatives that are happening to fight misogyny and the horrific statistics on femicide around the world, why does nobody address the readily available violent pornography available online to young men at average age of 12? This is where the desensitization to women and their concerns start.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know that it's where it starts. I would challenge folks to think about the myriad ways in which we are raised to believe that women exist to be someone's wife, someone's husband, someone's sexual partner. So I think it goes far beyond the world of sex work and consumption of pornography. But I think the issues around the consumption of pornography come from the fact that people do not have robust consent education. And so the only way in which they're seeing sexuality reflected is in pornography, where for various reasons, in large part just because of the production, they don't get into the details around consent and navigating those things. They just kind of cut to the action. So the reason why it's problematic is because it's all there is. And if we actually had fulsome conversations around sex and sexuality, healthy relationships, consent, all of those things, then people wouldn't be kind of drawn to the one place in which they're seeing that happen. But I do think that it goes far beyond that, just down to you go to a toy store and it's still separated by these are the toys that girls like and these are the toys that boys want. It's the holidays. How many things from like Indigo to your local store have a, if you're looking for your daughter, if you're looking for your son, like the world is just so gendered in these ways that oftentimes it's the air we breathe. Like we're not even cognizant of the ways in which, like you're pregnant and people are already asking you, what's the sex of the baby? Like it matters, you know, but it's just like, we're just so fixated on these gender divisions that it's ingrained in us.
Yeah. Okay. Ron wants to know if you were aware of Carey Price's pro-gun statement on Saturday. The Habs say that he wasn't aware of the Polytechnique anniversary, but do you think his position is part of the problem?
Yeah, so I did read that actually shortly before we hopped on today's call. So Carey Price, big time Habs hockey player, posted pro-gun stuff on his Instagram on the weekend, and in particular elevated a group that is opposed to gun legislation, and used a discount code this week with the word poly, so like a direct, basically, as I was saying earlier, using Polytechnique as a punchline. And I do think that's problematic. We don't, you know, I don't know that that's true, right? That's what the Habs have said is the reason why Carey Price made that insensitive post. But again, I think it speaks to the fact here's somebody who's lived in the area for at least a decade. He's at, I believe he's in his 30s, if not his early 40s, like he's not 12. And so he should know. And I think especially if you're representing a city like Montreal, you need to be cognizant that this is a very important issue to that community that you represent. And so again, I mean, I posted the most banal post about, hey, this is why we celebrate December 6th. And there's almost like 10,000 people who retweeted it. And a bunch of them were like, I had never heard of this before. That's what this is. So just like we're learning that we need more Holocaust education in schools, we also need more history about what's been going on in this country. Because again, if we understood that we had a mass shooting in 1989, where he literally targeted women because they were women, then we wouldn't be so smug about the mass shootings that are happening in the US. We wouldn't be so smug about, oh, these incels are new. This is interesting. Who are these young men? It's like, they've existed for quite some time, you know, but we don't know our history. So it's easy to mount your high horse if you don't actually know what's happened in your own backyard.
Yeah, very good point. We're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much, Julie. And I just wish you so much courage in your fight because, you know, you have to also be, you know, while you're advocating for women, you're also receiving the brunt, I'm sure, of a lot of abuse. And that's got to be hard, but I'm sure I speak for all of us here that we wish you lots of courage and keep the good fight going. So thank you. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to switch to another brave woman now, Margaret Drescher. Margaret is originally from California, but has lived in Nova Scotia for more than 40 years. Last June, she and her husband, Jim, transferred 80 hectares of old growth forest to Ulnaweg Education Center, an Indigenous-led charity. They were joining a growing movement of settlers who are giving land back to its original inhabitants. In our December issue, Sarah Trelevin wrote a feature detailing Margaret's journey toward this momentous decision. And also she explored the larger idea of taking personal responsibility for reconciliation between Indigenous and settler communities. So please join me in welcoming Margaret.
Hi, thank you so much. Delighted to be here and very inspired by the two speakers before me. Talk about courage and powerful subjects. The issues are extremely important, and thank you so much for both being so thorough and passionate in speaking about them. I speak to you from Mi'kma'ki, Ounamaki, the land of the settlers called Nova Scotia. You may know us, we're way over on the other side of the province, of the country. I'm here on the land of the Mi'kmaq. I'm here on the earth in the watershed of the Windhorse Farm, here at Atumakuk Lake. This is a wide spot of the Pishnuguk River, whose headwaters are in the Annapolis Valley and meander, connecting and disconnecting. It pools at the Atumakuk Lake, the place of the wild strawberry, nourishing these wetlands and its inhabitants. I'm bringing you here so that you can hear the story about this land. This is where 500 years ago, the Mi'kmaq gathered berries, cranberries, leaves, moss, and many other medicines in the land here, in the open meadows, in the fields. They hunted in the forest, moose, caribou, elk, bear. And on the shores, they caught salmon, clams, and mussels. They harvested with perfect balance and reciprocity with the Great Mother for thousands of years. This is the unceded ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq. Mi'kmaq means friend, kin, the people. And this land was taken. This was never given. This land was taken by the white settlers. So this land here has been returned to those it was taken from 180 years ago. The first members of the Wenzel family who were here, they cared for this place as if it were 7 generations to come. And there were. They did that, and now the Mi'kmaq will do the same. This morning when I got up, the first animal that I saw, I walked outside and saw an eagle. In Indigenous cultures and many other cultures, the eagle embodies vast vision, seeing from above, broad view. It is also the symbol of love. Eagles love for their young and each other. They mate for life, sometimes 20 years. It seems appropriate to have seen an eagle as love is the lead in this introduction to the subject. My purpose in sharing my journey of land back is to talk about love of the land and the experience of land back. Hopefully by hearing one story, you can discover your own with land or maybe something else. When my husband, Jim, and I first came here over 30 years ago, we walked into the forest and felt the land and had an instant connection. We walked deeply and consciously on this land, knowing the plight. We fell in love and could not walk away from the situation, knowing this land would be clear-cut. So without any money and through the generosity of many people, we ended up buying it. Magic, serendipity. A teacher I heard recently talked about how to fulfill your vision. If you have something that you want to do, you can think of it as walking on a path. And think of one leg as being what your aspiration is. Wanting to be just, wanting to eat less, wanting to act from love. And then the other leg takes a step and feels if it's in sync with that, if it's in accord with the lead, and then it learns and adjusts from that. So yes, that's my right leg is my lead, and that is acting from love. And then my next step was the first time that I heard Chief Seattle talk about not owning the land. And if you haven't heard that, I can tell you what his quote was. But basically, land cannot be owned, like water and air. So then you contemplate that and see if that's in accord with acting from love. And then you take another step. And this is how to walk on the path. This is how to take a journey. So it was from a place of love and connection that we began this step of transitioning Windtor's farm to the Indigenous people. The steps have been gradual and they've been very personal, one foot after another. We felt the power of place. We're in conversation with the land and listening to her messages, leaning in and partaking of the medicine and learning from the medicine of this land. This all contributed to a natural land back. I just realized that our connecting in that way was what the Mi'kmaq did for thousands of years here. Connecting with them through the land that they cared for, that they lived with, the land that they lived from. The big step for us came 6 years ago when I was very sick, and we knew we needed to figure out who would care for this place, who would take care of the farm, the gardens, the forest. And that's when the conversation began with Olnewig Education Foundation. They're an Indigenous-led registered charity. And we began to sit in circle with them. For 4 years, we've been sitting in circle. No sides, but a whole, co-creating this transition of this land into their capable hands. I'd say out of love. That's how it happened. A harmonious transfer to continue loving this land, this place, which is a place of reflection, learning, healing, and ceremony. This is almost a year later from when this transition has taken place on the 19th of this month. There are now ceremonies, educational courses, and land-based learning, ecology, culture, language, and the traditional ways of the people. Walking through the gardens just a couple of weeks ago, I passed the spine-covered structure that was hosting a circle of people. I couldn't see anybody, but I could hear the crackling of fire and the low voices, people sitting in circle, then an eruption of laughter, more conversation, laughter, and silence. These people on the land were the aunties and the uncles, the brothers and sisters, the mothers and fathers of missing and murdered Indigenous women. There they sat, hurting together, healing together, being together, connecting on the land. So this is how Land Back happened to us. And this is what we are now doing here at Windhorse, enjoying the power of people and place and the extraordinary things that a simple family, a farm family can do. So thank you so much for listening to this. I'm not accustomed to talking to how many? 77 people.
Thank you, Margaret. It was so beautifully poetic, and you convey such a sense of peace and calm in this place that you are in your life, and that's just it's just wonderful to be in your presence to hear that. I encourage questions, and I think my question is, if I can begin, I don't see any yet. You've done this major life transformative action. You've given this gift of land, and now you're past that. So it's sort of a question of what's next for you. Is there, you've done this massive thing. So where do you go from here?
Well, I'm only 75 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a lot more to go.
Yeah.
I live right next door to Windhorse Farm, and I think the journey will continue. We're very present and called upon to be a part of the activities that are happening there. So the journey does continue with the Indigenous people and the learning. It's a powerful place, and it's a powerful journey that they are going through. And so there's a continuing kind of opening and discovery and exploration. And they very generously invited us into it fully. And, now we're not responsible for the farm anymore. So we're beginning to travel. We're seeing our children and our grandchildren. We're starting to kind of get out. So that's good. That's a very positive thing for us as well.
That's great. One of my favorite quotes in the piece that Sarah Tree Levin wrote was about it was your advice towards the end of the piece about decolonizing ourselves, and the reminder that it's only from that kind of spiritual reconciliation that we can make an outward gesture, that you need to do the internal. I think your point was, if I'm getting you wrong, let me know, but that you need to do the internal work before you can extend yourself to do reconciliation work with Indigenous people as a settler person. Can you share a little bit more about like some advice, successes and pitfalls of doing this work, or some advice that you have about how to go about decolonizing our thinking and doing that work in ourselves?
Well, I think for sitting in a circle with Indigenous people is in itself a process of decolonizing.
Mm.
It's a way of opening and sharing and breaking down the boundaries that often we create for ourselves and we project onto others. That the circle is quite open, and the conversation is quite open and full of curiosity and creativity if we're willing to lean into that. Both my husband and I felt that that was one of the most powerful parts about being with the Indigenous community, was that their way of being was so inclusive and generous and curious that colonization didn't seem to be much of an issue, didn't seem to be in any way a problem. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that was our experience. That has been our experience of slowly decolonizing.
Okay. I'm going to just go to one more question, and then I'm going to wrap up, because we always promise people will end on time, but there's also time afterwards. If our guests are able to stay for a few minutes and have a bit more conversation, a bit more informally, we would love that. But so I'm going to give you one more question from Alan, and he's asking if you have children. I think you mentioned that you're now spending time traveling and with your children, and if they're involved in the future of Windhorse Farm.
Yes, we do. We have 5 children, and they're all completely 100% behind this transition. They're here as much as they can be and curious about what the developments will be, how things are going to be moving forward. So yes, that's it for me.
Thank you, Margaret. I know there's more questions. I hope you can stay for a couple of minutes, and and people who ask them can stick around for a few minutes and we can ask those. But basically that brings us to the end of our program. So thank you all so much for being here in a busy, busy time of year. Especially thank you to David, Julie, and Margaret, who volunteered their time to make this event possible. And we are so, so grateful to you. Tomorrow we'll be sending you a short survey by email so you can share your thoughts about this event with us. Broadview's Online Reading Club is a free event, but it does cost us $3,000 per year to have a Zoom plan that can handle a group of this size. So if you're already a donor to Broadview, thank you so much. Your donations help Broadview continue to feature exceptional people like Margaret and hire fabulous journalists and writers like David and Julie. If you're not a donor, please consider making a donation for tonight's event, and Sharon will post a link for donations in the chat. And we'll also have a link with tomorrow's survey for donations. Finally, it wouldn't be the Christmas season, and I wouldn't be a very good publisher if I didn't also put in a plug for Broadview gift subscriptions. Most of you are subscribers, so you already know that Broadview would make a great gift for friends, family members, and colleagues on your giving list. So please visit broadview.org/subscribe for information. Or you can use the gift subscription postcard that was on your most recent issue of Broadview, and consider giving that a gift. It's the gift that keeps on giving all year long. As I mentioned, we'll stick around for a little bit after this evening. Usually that's just chat time, and we can have a bit of chatting. We've also got our new Director of Development, Tricia Elliott, here. And she was just hoping for a time to meet Broadview's readers in person a little bit and hear more about Broadview, why Broadview is important to you. So if you have a few minutes and can also talk to Trisha, we'd appreciate anybody who'd like to stick around. Otherwise, if you need to be on your way, thank you again for being here. Be well, and we hope to see you back here for the next online reading club, which is on January 9th at 7 p.m. Eastern. And we'll be discussing the January-February issue at that time. So Merry Christmas to those who are going, and we'll stick around for everybody else who's able to stay. Thank you. So there's some extra questions in the chat, Margaret, that you might want to take a look at. But I was just actually, if you don't mind, if I can just jump in and ask Trisha to introduce herself and say a couple of words and go for there. Trisha, you still here?
I am. Hi.
Hello.
I'm Trish, and it's so nice to see familiar faces in this group, and some that I haven't seen since before COVID. So it's nice to see you, and nice to meet you if we haven't met before. As Jocelyn said, I think she said anyway, I am the newest hire at Broadview. But I'm not very new because I've been writing freelancing for Broadview for 20 years. It's hard to imagine that it's been that long, but it has. And so I've been working with many of the staff here for a long time. And so, you know, this is now a full-time position. And don't worry, I'm not asking you for money tonight. I do want to say, oh, I do want to say thank you. And I'm sure many of you support Broadview and help us cover costs that our subscriptions don't cover. So thank you for that. I did want to call your attention to a couple of things. One is that starting in March, I will be writing a piece in every issue of the print magazine going forward. And I'll be writing about the impact of your generosity. And in the first piece in March, I'm going to talk about why, as a United Church minister myself, I decided to get my fundraising certification. And so all to say, I'd invite you to have a look for the Friends column in the magazine. And if you have any fundraising tips for Broadview, I'm all ears. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And I also wanted to let you know that in the new year, I'll be engaging our board here at Broadview, the staff, our donors, and hopefully those who follow us closely or attend events in a case for support process. And that will help us hone in on why Broadview matters. It'll help us build a case for support that will become the backbone of our ability really to seek funding in a variety of ways. So I will be putting the call out in the new year to see if some people in this group here tonight would be willing to sit in on a focus group, like 1 half-hour to hour session to help us hone in on that case for support. So hopefully, if you're interested, you'll be able to participate in that process. And I guess tonight, as I've been meeting people, as I've been meeting our supporters and our staff, I've been asking one question. And I thought I would ask tonight, and if you're able to answer, you can answer in the chat or follow the same process that we have tonight. But it's a simple question, you know, what do you love most about Broadview? And what does it contribute to your life, right? So I guess it's a two-parter. You can answer one or both, but what do you love most about Broadview? What does it contribute to your life? And if you could just, you know, put your answer in the chat, that would be great.
Thanks, Trisha. And if people want to be part of a process about looking at the case for support or sharing ideas, do you want to put your email into the chat also, and where they can reach you?
My email? Yep, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, feel free. Oh, we've got an answer from Carol already. First in the gate. Way to go.
Excellent. Broadview gives me hope and makes me think outside the box. Awesome.
That's great.
Actually, tonight, just listening to Julie and David and Margaret, I had so many questions and really expanded some of my own thinking too. So that's awesome. Anyone else? John, you're already signed up. Excellent. Thank you.
Maybe we could let those answers trickle in as people
Sure.
are listening. And I also want to honor that our guests have stayed on after a little bit later. So if anybody has a question for our guests, just maybe, well, you can use the put up your hand function if you'd like. I know there were some that didn't get asked, but just it's kind of informal now, so I don't need to direct all of it, but I guess it's helpful if I direct it a little bit.
Oh, I see. Is it Carol? Do you have your hand up? I thought I saw a little hand go up.
Oh, yes, Carol. Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Hello, and nice to see you, Trish. Are you still in Ottawa or have you moved to Toronto?
No, I'm still here in Ottawa.
Okay. Well, I'm down in New Brunswick now. So
Oh.
Margaret, my question is to you. I'm also on Mi'kma'ki, and our group here in the Moncton region, I've been trying to support the Wet'suwet'en people with decolonizing, with the RBC banks that are funding the pipeline. And so we reached out to an Indigenous person in the region, thinking that he might like to gather some of his people to come out for our rallies. And he very firmly told me that he worked for the band and council, and that his job was to look after the wealth and health of the band, and he was not in favor of the hereditary system. So I'm just wondering for yourself, Margaret, do you find there is a struggle or a tension between the hereditary system and the band and council system, which of course is an outcrop of the Indian Act?
I can't tell you. I don't understand the two of them well enough to be able to give you an educated answer. I think it's a great question, and maybe somebody else here is more familiar with the two and could help you out, but I'm afraid I can't.
So the people who are part of the land that you've been stewarding, are they part of a reserve system, or do you know?
They are part of the reserve system. Chris Gugu, who is the I'd say the spiritual head of Olnewig, it's a charitable education and development organization. Yeah, have you heard of Olnewig?
No.
They're up in the Truro area.
Okay.
And yes, they are definitely part of the, they're all, the people are involved in the reserves.
Okay.
I can't give you more of an answer than that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
I know